Thank you, Professor Eyal. A very
Thank
good
you
evening.
and good evening.
Very good evening, and I'm very thankful that you have uh, spared some time to join us in our podcast. I know that you are a busy man with lots of activities, and I also know that you are living in a like it's a threat zone right now. Things
Yeah.
are uncertain around you. Uh, as a Pakistani who knows what is the price of terrorism, trust me, I am the one who prays for everyone's security on this planet Earth.
Let's hope, that violence will come to an end and we all live in coexistence as we should, you know,
Yeah, inshallah, that
inshallah.
we will see that day soon. So it is a very interesting topic today. It's about Syria, and you are among few people in the world who are considered as authority on Syria and its background and what is going on and what happened before. And while living in Pakistan or in any country on the planet Earth, people are known Syria after Daesh. That was kind of a trauma for humanity.
Yeah.
They are burning people, they are slaughtering people, they are like it was kind of hell which they have made everywhere
Yeah.
they were there. So I would love to ask you, please give us a little backgrounder of the situation of present day Syria.
Well, I have to admit, that I studied Syria all my life. I devoted my life to the study and research of the Syrian people, of the Syrian state for almost 40 years. And nothing that I study prepare me for these tragic events that the world witnessed during the last 10 years. And I also have to admit that ISIS is terrible, but it's only part of the picture. And more people were killed, by the regime, by its allies, through the use of chemical weapon than ISIS. So ISIS is terrible, but it's really part of the picture. Now, from the early beginning, Syria is very complicated country because, first of all, the structure of the society. It's not unlike Egypt or Tunisia or Jordan or even the Palestinians. There is no one community. There are several communities, Sunnis, Alawis who come from the Shia, Druze, and so on and so forth. They live in coexistence, and still the tension is there, and slowly, slowly it was built. And then to that, we have to add the social and economic distress. I mean, Syria suffered from economic crisis for many years. The growth of the population, it was around 6 million 30 years ago. Before the beginning of the war, it was 25 million. So here is another reason. And of course, ruthless dictatorship. I mean, no democracy, a regime that is actually a military regime. So all these created the background. And indeed, when the Arab Spring started in Egypt and then moved to Tunisia, it came eventually to Syria, and it started like many Arab countries, sort of, peaceful protest. People went out to the street to demonstrate, to protest against the ruler. But then, the mentality of such regimes is that demonstrators and protesters who are marching in the streets are welcomed by fire, by police, by military and security units. Um, from the early beginning, people were killed on the streets, and Here, the peaceful protest started, first of all, to spread like a fire all over Syria. And then what started as a small protest developed into a major uprising, revolution, but eventually take into consideration the structure and the characteristic of the Syrian society. Well, eventually it deteriorated into a civil war where communities started fighting with each other. And then we have to add to that the Islamic dimension, the religious dimension. I mean, people who were very moderate when it comes to religion turned to be very radical because of many reasons. And then we witnessed the emergence of very radical groups. Now, from the early beginning, the war became very bloody. You mentioned ISIS. On the other hand, the Syrian regime used chemical weapons against its own people. So it became eventually a big tragedy. When we look at the bottom line, I mean, 500,000 people were killed out of a population of 25 million when the war started. 11 million lost their houses. It's half of the population. And 1/3 of the population, 5 to 8 million, had to find shelter outside Syria. They became refugees outside Syria. So it's really a major tragedy. And then, of course, when a country like Syria is becoming weak and the society and the state are collapsing, well, foreign actors, regional powers, international powers start to interfere in the war. The Saudis, the Turks, on the one hand, help the rebels. The Iranian, the Russian help the regime. When we look nowadays at Syria, we can say on the one hand, when it comes to the battlefield, the rebels were defeated. I mean, no more rebels in the sense that half of the country was governed by rebel groups. But at the same time, the regime didn't win. I mean, he doesn't has effective rule over the country. He cannot start reconstructing and rebuilding the state and the society and the infrastructure. Is too weak. Is has a lack of any financial resources, and he is fully dependent on his allies, the Russians and the Iranians, who turn Syria into some sort of colony that they use for their own purposes. So when we look at Syria, we see defeated society, failed state. The regime is there, but only with an effective power, only maybe in the big cities, not outside the city. Iranian, Russians, and then involvement of everywhere, the Turks, the Israelis, the Saudis, the Americans. Syria, which was a very stable state, a regional power, not too rich and prosperous, but still, offer, its population stability. Well, it's not unfortunately the case anymore, and it turned to be a source of terror, radicalism for the entire world, clearly for the entire region. So from the point of view of the regime, Bashar al-Assad is still the president, he is sitting in his palace, but when it comes to the ordinary Syrian people, well, they are the main loser of this war.
So I would like to ask one short question here. Where is USA then? If Iran and Russia are playing right now in Syria and they are making it a colony,
Yeah.
what is the role of US in the region? They were there in Iraq, they had engagements in Syria. They have reservation on the role of Iran and Russia, but now they just left it for them.
Yeah, well, the Middle East in general, we can say, is not important anymore for the Americans. You know, in the 40s and 50s and the 60s, the 20th century, first of all, it was part of the Cold War, so it was an asset that you need to have. And then because of the oil and the energy resources, it was important for the American economy. Now there is no anymore Cold War. Russia is not really a real rival. You know, America is much stronger and than the Russians. And for the Americans, Syria, you know, there is no big difference between President Obama and President Trump and President Biden when it comes to Syria. The only difference is that Trump said very bluntly what Obama was thinking about Syria. You know, death and sand. You know, when all those wars are terrible tribal wars, why should we get interfere in these wars? So, from the early beginning, the point of view of the American was, you know, Syria is not too important for us, so we send our boys after we, you know, get engaged in Afghanistan and Iraq. Why to send our forces to Syria? And they will fight everyone, like in Afghanistan. You come to save someone, and then everybody is fighting or shooting at you. So the American bottom line was, you know, what's the use? And they gave up from the early beginning. And this is to show us that moral issues, well, are not as crucial and important for the American as we tend to think. Practical matters are more important.
Hmm. That's very, that's very. So, how you think that Iran? I always become confused when it's about Iran. Iran is suffering, its economy is suffering. There are lots of pressures inside Iran. I have witnessed while my visit in Iran that
Yeah.
people are talking about democracy, people are talking about economy, people are uncomfortable with the economic situation inside Iran. But still, Iran manages to put its nose in Syria, Yemen.
Yeah.
You talk about anywhere in the region.
Yeah.
They are just pumping in the resources in Iraq or anywhere else. Lebanon is the case.
Yeah.
So how they do manage to do this all?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that there are two Irans. One is one is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, the Ayatollahs who control Iran, and the other are the ordinary Iranians. I guess that for the ordinary Iranians, most of them do not care not about Gaza and not about Yemen and not about Beirut and not about Syria. And
Mhm.
we used to hear such, you know, in the street demonstrations in Tehran against the regime, there were people who said, you know, Iran first. But for the regime, it's important, and it's important because and they said it very clearly. You know, they said Syria is more important for us than Ahwaz. Ahwaz is, you know, a major part of Iran near the Iranian Iraqi border. It's an Arab region that is populated mainly by Arab, but it's part of Iran, and Saddam Hussein wanted to occupy it. So the message is quite clear for security reasons, for, you know, um, protecting and promoting their strategic view of themselves as a regional power. They want to have control over Iraq, over Syria, Lebanon, That's how they will get to the Mediterranean, and for that they need to have their all over Syria.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's very interesting. And where the Assad family stands, like historically, we know that Syria is one of the piece of cakes which was distributed among the family of Sharif of Makkah, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah,
was one piece which is given to one of his son. The second was Iraq, and third was the Egypt, I guess, and the
yeah,
Jordan was as well.
yeah, yeah.
There were
That's
four pieces of the cake which they distributed
right.
among the sons. And then there was a coup by President Assad's father, Hafizul
Yes,
Assad,
Hafiz al-Assad. Yes, that's
and
right.
he took it over. He was, by the way, a liberal person, and Assad seems a liberal person.
Hmm. At the beginning, people look at him and said, unlike his father, he spent some time in Great Britain, in London.
Yeah.
He's a physician, he knows English, he's more open. So maybe it will be different. But, to that, Bashar gave a very clear answer. You are totally mistaken, because I was raised in Syria, in Damascus, in the house of my father. So I will follow him. And well, you could say Hafiz al-Assad was a very brutal uh, leader, killed many people, arrested many people. But, when we come to Bashar al-Assad, 500,000 people were killed, using chemical weapon against uh, your own people. So, well, at the beginning there were hopes, but eventually it was proven to be, more of the same.
Hmm. That's interesting. That's very interesting. And what is the uh, what is the population? They are mainly Sunnis, I guess, in Syria.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Well, 60% are Sunnis, or used to be Sunnis.
Okay.
But when you look at the Syrian population, there are Arabs and non-Arabs. The Kurds, for example, are Sunnis, but they are not Arab, and they want autonomy or independence, as they are not part of, the Sunni community.
Hmm.
And then within the Sunni community, there is the split between the elites in the big cities that usually tend to support the regime, and the rural areas. And then there are the minority communities, Druze, 5%, Christian, 10, 12%, and then the Alawites. The Alawites, it's a minority sect, not Sunni, coming from the Shiite. But they were successfully taking over the country. And the Assad dynasty, the Assad family, is coming from this community. And for many Syrians, well, they say it's a minority community. Why should they, govern and rule Syria? And of course, they give other members of their community privileges. 90% of the high-ranking commanders in the Syrian army are Alawites. And in addition to that, well, people say they are not real Muslims. When the war became very, you know, this process of religious radicalization, many people say, how come that someone who is not a real and true believer rule a Muslim state? So it's very complicated, and that's what caused the bloodshed.
And can we say that this was one of the reasons which extended the strength to Daesh?
Uh, well, ISIS, Daesh, um, is something that was established in Iraq. It was
Hmm.
not originally emerged in Syria. Many of the leaders, mainly the Khalifa, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, from Baghdad, from Iraq, and they
Hmm.
used the chaos and get into Syria. Now you have to remember, you mentioned it quite correctly, that Iraq and Syria are new states. They were
Hmm.
established by the British and the French 100 years ago, and it's not quite clear where is exactly the border. I mean, Damascus is Syria, Baghdad is Iraq,
Hmm.
but the border area, well, so if ISIS is operating on the Iraqi side, it will have supporters on the Syrian side, and that's what happened. It took over, this region, and for some time did succeed. But ISIS, we have to understand it. In Iraq, the Sunnis were the ruling elite for many years, and then the American invaded Iraq and brought democracy to the Middle East, which is not prepared for democracy. So the Shiites took over and, of course, started suppressing the Sunnis. So ISIS was a way for the Sunnis, even moderate, even people who didn't consider themselves as radical, to protest and revolt against the central regime. And this was, to a certain degree, also the case in Syria. But Syria now very moderate. I mean, but because of the war, because of the chaos, because of the deterioration of the situation, the collapse of the state institution, everybody, the state is not there anymore. So the tribe, the family, the Hamula, and also ISIS as a major religious group.
That's true. Um, One of my friend Naima Hassan is asking that being an expert in contemporary history of Lebanon and Syria, do you see
Yeah.
any resolution of current conflict which is taking hundreds lives or thousands lives?
There are so many conflicts, uh, I'm afraid it will take time. No easy solution. I don't see any coming end to the Syrian crisis. It will be a very, very unfortunately long process. And also, when we move to Lebanon, it's once again the structural issue. I mean, so many communities they cannot agree with each other on anything. So when the state is based on sectarianism and communalism, and your fate is being dictated by your origin, by your community, I doubt it very much. And there is the foreign intervention, the Syrian, now the Iranians. I doubt it very much whether we'll see an end to this chaos in the near future.
Professor, I was just wondering that we have seen Iraq, uh, US tend to bring democracy in Iraq and they tried it and it is not working, by the way.
Yeah.
There is Libya crisis. We have seen it that Arab Spring brought a change in Libya, and now it is worsened. The situation is worse now.
Yeah.
Uh, Same as Syria. Uh, if democracy is not working there, regimes are not getting weaker and they are gaining strength from nearby countries or the international players. What is the future of the communities there, their population? They're
Well,
just suffering. Thousands and thousands of people are refuge now. They don't
yeah.
have health facilities, no question of education there.
Well, that's the right question. I mean, if you go back, let's say, 50 years ago, in Europe, you had 400 million people.
Hmm.
Nowadays, you have in Europe 500
Yeah.
million. So it's a growth of 25%. In 2050, 20, 30 years from today, you will have the same 500 million. There is no growth in the population of Europe. When you move to the Middle East, in 1960s there were 100 million. Today there are 400 million.
Mm,
And in 2050, 750 million. They will all immigrate to Europe, you see,
mm,
because when you look at our region, growth of the population, lack of any resources, energy, and also water. Water is the main issue in many of the countries. This was also part of the problem that Syria was facing, and one of the causes to the eruption of the revolt. And then you have dictatorial regime and the very conservative society that is not open for a change. So modernity, the effort to modernize. I mean, when I say modernize, not necessarily turn them secular. I'm speaking about modernize. Well, it's a total failure, and the result is, lack of stability, constant conflicts, and now there are the conflicts over water. You see, Ethiopia and Egypt uh, uh, might go to war because of the issue of water. Syria, Turkey, they're all fighting over water. But also for the young men in the street, no hope for a better future, no work, no place to live, no educational system that can offer him education or healthcare, or so no real hope for a better future. That's the tragedy. And that's the main cause. Now the dictatorial regime tried to manage somehow, sometimes to recruit the support of some clerics and religious circles who tell the population, calm down, to at least provide the people with, some food and work. And of course, the Iron Fist. But the situation in the Middle East, I'm afraid, will continue to be the same for many years. And the result is a threat of immigration to Europe, but threat of radicalism and terrorism all over the world.
and that's a ticking bomb. And
Yeah.
I guess not a ticking bomb. We are seeing that the bomb is going to be explode in some time.
Well, you see all the time, you see Al Qaeda and
Mm,
then ISIS and terror activity all over the world, and then the Arab Spring, and then conflict within, the region, the Saudis and the Iranians and the Yemenis, and this will unfortunately will continue. And as I said before, the fear of the European is that there will be a mass immigration of million of uh, people from the region to Europe. That's
so
why Europe is supporting,
yeah.
the current regimes. It's Europe doesn't want democracy,
Mm,
because if you have a strong leader, a dictator, he will prevent people from immigrate. Once Gaddafi, the regime of
mm,
Gaddafi collapsed in Libya, people start immigrating into Europe. So
mm.
Europe wants stability. Speak about democracy, but wants stability.
They don't want to see an Arabic Europe.
No, no, no. But we see, the immigration is going on,
Yeah, and that's a really problem for them as well, and for the region as well. So, Professor, can you suggest me if we talk hypothetically, small states can be a solution to this problem, split of the state, like if there are one Kurd Iraq, one Sunni Iraq, one Shia Iraq, and this is how the split in the states and the model of small states in the region. Will it be an answer to the question?
I doubt it very much because, when you speak about small states, so the Kurds, they want some sort of a state, but they are surrounded by other, like by the Sunnis and by the others, and they can't, coexist by themselves. The Sunni and the Shiite are mixed together, in most parts of Iraq. In Syria, the Alawis live in area is mainly agriculture, but they cannot uh, um, build and a durable state. So eventually they will somehow have to work together. When you speak about tribes, about pre-modern state, this can work. But when we speak about modern states, well, small state based on, communal origin of the population in uh, deserted areas, this cannot really work.
Hmm. That's right. That's right. So, how Assad is going to rebuild Syria again if he wants to do it?
Well, I think he wants to do it. He doesn't want the refugees to come back. That's for sure. He said it very clearly. I mean, I got rid of them. There is now much more harmony in Syria than before because we got rid of all those people who revolted against me and were burdened on our economy. So why should I get them back? So
Hmm.
they should stay in Turkey, in Jordan, in other places.
Hmm.
But his army is exhausted. He lacks any financial resources. He is not well accepted by most members of the international community, and he is totally dependent on the Iranian and the Syrians. So maybe, but it will be a long, long way till we, see Syria coming to what it was before the revolution. But for the regime, that's okay. He's in power. Nobody is threatening him, so he shouldn't be bothered about.
That's tricky. The international politics is always tricky to understand
Yeah,
because
that's
there
right.
are powers, they have their own uh, gains and interests, and
Yeah,
that is the motivational force behind their policies, how they do
yeah,
it there.
that's right.
What are the gains for Iran in Syria, and what are the losses for Iran in Syria?
Well, I think that there are the economic benefits. There are some oil fields, there are gas fields in the Mediterranean along the shore of Syria. Iran wants to benefit from the Syrian economy to rebuild, so to get the money as the one who rebuilt Syria, and also the strategic benefit. I mean, it will enable Iran to reach to the Mediterranean. It will strengthen Iran vis-a-vis Israel and the Americans. So for the Iranians, and this is maybe one of their colony, and the only colony, maybe Lebanon. Yeah. So for the Iranians, it's an important asset, and they will not give it up so easily. They came to Syria to stay with the support. Now, it's not only the Russian, for example, sent Russian troops, and they also recruited some Syrian militias, and they pay them, but those are Syrian militias, Syrians. While the Iranians recruited, Shiite volunteers from all around the world. They recruited Shiite volunteers from Iraq, and they established a special brigade with these people, and then from Pakistan, and then from Afghanistan, Zainabiyun, Haidariyun, Fatimiyun, three brigades, and through these people who are not Syrian, they try to impose their control over Syria because those people do not follow anyone else than the Iranians.
And that's a problem there, and that will be a
Yeah,
problem here in Pakistan as well,
yeah.
because
When they
once
come
people,
back, yes, when
yeah,
they come back, yeah,
once people started earning money through the barrel of their guns,
Mm.
they keep it doing. Then no matter
Right.
they are in Syria or they are in Pakistan, they
Yeah,
will keep
right.
earning the money from the barrel of their guns.
Yeah,
And that will be a problem. That will be a serious
totally
problem.
right. Yeah.
And how you see the Golan Heights problem with Syria? That's a long, long word which we heard from media, from television shows,
Yeah.
small lines in the big
Yeah.
write-ups on the region. How you see it? What is the
Well,
future of that
yes,
conflict?
well, I have to say, um, it seemed to be very crucial, but when the war started, everybody forgot all about the Golan Heights. And by the way, it was very quiet there because the regime kept it quiet and the rebels kept it quiet. Now, there were many rounds of peace negotiation between the Israelis and the Syrians. And in many of those negotiations, some Israeli governments offered the Golan Heights to the Syrian back. I mean, it is uh, Syrian territory that was occupied by Israel in the Six-Day War. Trump recognized it as part of Israel, but the international community says, you have to negotiate about it. If you reach an agreement and the Syrian says it's yours, that's okay. But if not, you can't annex it by yourself. The problem is that the Syrians were very hesitant about making peace with Israel because, presenting themselves as a resistance to, as a power that is fighting Israel was very important. Now they come to their own people and say, till now we needed a strong regime because of Israel. Now, if there is peace with Israel, why do we need, such a regime with fist hand and iron? For many reasons, the regime was hesitant to make this peace with Israel, and the offer is not anymore on the table. Maybe in the future, in the long run, when Syria once again will re-emerge as a stable state, we can resume negotiation, and then maybe. But it's already 60 years, almost 60 years. So it's
It's a long way to go.
yes, you're right.
That's right. So, thank you, Professor. I am really thankful for your time and
Thank you.
wonderful talk. And I am sure if you could please spare some more time and we can
Sure.
discuss. There are so many
Yeah,
topics
yeah.
which I would love to hear from you. Your inputs are very valuable. Your research is very valuable, and it's my wish and request that please try to spare some more time for our podcast, and I will be happy to host you again.
I'll be happy to be with you once again in the near future.
Inshallah, inshallah.
So yes, and should I greet you? Today is the Eid al-Fitr.
It is not today.
Yeah,
It is day after tomorrow. We are still
yeah,
confused. We are still confused.
yeah,
There are
yeah. I
few
know.
news about the moon, and there are
Yeah,
denial.
that's right. So anyhow, so we say now Bikulam went to Mcher, so greetings of God upon you.
Thank you, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.